Do you see how Marie Antoinette puts her hand on the globe? Very cutesy, very demure. See how she looks right at us in the portrait? Very elegant, very demure. You see how this little short man holds her head up on a stick? Not very mindful. Welcome back. I'm Evil Butts, and I tell you fucked up stories from history. And this is the story of Marie Antoinette. She was born as Archduchess Maria Antonia, November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna, to her father, Holy Roman Emperor Francis I, and her mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. And the emperor and empress had a whole assload of children. Marie Antoinette was number 15 out of 16 children. 11 of those children were girls. And all 11 of them had the first name Maria, like their mother. Naming practice later adopted by George Foreman. And because all the children had the same name, they often went by their second name, so Marie Antoinette would go by Antoine. And because she was so late in the litter of children, they really didn't give much of a shit when she was born. They were kind of like, another one, thank you. And this is a very important family she's born into, since this is the Habsburg dynasty. And with her having this bad bitch mother with Maria Theresa, it's actually crazy to think this little baby would grow to become one of the most infamous women in history. I'm sure if you know anything about Marie Antoinette, you probably know that her life ended on a guillotine during the French Revolution. But what you might not know is she was born during some bullshit too. When Marie was born, Austria was in a bit of a secession mess, and they were battling the fuck out of Prussia. And since Prussia all of a sudden is kissing England in the mouth, Austria starts looking to its neighbors to try to join some allies, notably France. Perfect, because the family's speaking French anyway, and I'm sure you can see where this is going. So when Marie Antoinette is less than a year old, she's betrothed to the grandson of King Louis XV of France, and the little boy was very close in age to her. A powerful alliance, but since these children are babies, it doesn't really matter that much until they're older. So she is still in Vienna being raised with her royal family. And her parents are very much big dogs doing big dog shit. Growing up, her mother, Maria Theresa, was the Queen of Hungary and Bohemia in her own right, as well as Empress of the HRE, because Big Mama T's dad was Charles VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, who had made it so his heir would be her in place of a son. He married her off to one of her many Habsburg cousins in Francis I, and she quickly put in his bid for Holy Roman Emperor, since the Holy Roman Empire did not really want a woman at the head of it. But obviously, she ran the show anyway, so boo misogyny, tomatoes, tomatoes. And the Empress definitely had baddie lore, like even her kids were really intimidated by her demeanor. And she was a political powerhouse. Apparently she was birthing 16 babies and writing declarations from her birthing bed. Like, okay, she's on one. And she was of course heavily involved in her most important duty, which was creating powerful marriage alliances for her children to support the Austrian Habsburg dynasty. And Marie Antoinette's emperor father in all of this is kind of just doing party boy shit. He's gambling, he's having affairs, he's hating his wife. But little Marie Antoinette adored her father, and the two of them seemed to have a pretty loving, close relationship. And her father seemed more than happy to just be a figurehead in her mother's operation. And growing up, she's a working royal child, so she's going to events and appearances with her family, but she has a pretty private life in Austria and an education that's pretty heavy in the arts and history. So years pass, she's kind of the neglected millionth child of the group, and eventually France sends over a tutor to kind of assess the situation with Marie, their potential future princess. So Marie is showing him how she reads and how she writes, and he's like, damn, tu es stupide? You're kind of illiterate. He recognizes that she's a little bit lazy with her academics, but she does have a passion for the arts. And she's kind of like, what do you want from me? I'm Marie number 11, okay? They don't care if I can read, I'm shredding on the piano. But he kind of whips her into shape, and she does eventually become a better student, so she probably just needed someone paying attention to her and some structure. Unfortunately, she would have a few rough years ahead in her adolescence, with 3 of her siblings dying of smallpox. Then her dad, Emperor Fran, dies, and the whole family just kind of gets like sad and weird. And Empress Mama T just wears black for the rest of her life. It's a whole thing. Very goth. That brings us to 1770, where she gets shipped off to France, and she is in for the culture shock of her fucking life. Because I'm sorry, the French were absolutely perverse, insane freaks at the time. The year is 1770, and our little Marie Antoinette is engaged to the French king's grandson. And Marie Antoinette's mother is the Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. So she sends little Marie off to France and is like, go be the perfect wife and do not embarrass my ass. So she takes off for her new life, and when she gets to the France-Austrian border, she changes her clothes, so she's in a completely French outfit, and she takes on the name Marie Antoinette. So she goes, she's presented to the French court, and she's married to the French prince, Louis. the chapel at Versailles. And pretty much immediately on arrival, Marie Antoinette is like, holy shit, this place is crazy. Because the French court was truly magnificent. It was often imitated, never duplicated. It was the shining star of European courts. And not only that, everyone's dressed nice and they know about art and culture and they're funny and they're witty. And she said, all right, bet. I'm just gonna slay this shit so hard and be the hottest thing in France. And Marie and her young husband try to adapt to their new married life within the French court, and it's going so-so. A lot of people really adore them within the French court, but they are 14 and 15, and they're kind of annoying, and they're not very good at etiquette, so they fuck up a lot of shit. On top of that, the French royal culture was just kind of like perverse and creepy, and they didn't really give the royal family any privacy. The French really felt they had a right to the royal family, and even something as private as giving birth would be done to an audience. And this is, of course, a very big culture shock for Marie Antoinette, who comes from the Austrian culture, where they have a very strict difference between public spaces, private spaces, and political spaces, and they very much value their privacy. And Marie, being a young woman, didn't really love the idea of all these pervy eyes on her, so she replaced a lot of the people in her household with younger, more vibrant people she liked to be around. And some people didn't like that. A lot of snotty French people didn't trust the Austrian princess, which started to get to her young husband when all of his friends were calling his bird lame. Because other than looking like their siblings, they don't really have much in common. She was fun and fresh and self-assured, and he was lame and weird and a drag and couldn't even decide what to have for dinner. And because of the strain on their marriage and just a series of other events, the couple would fail to consummate the marriage for like 7 years. Which of course everyone knows because they are Big Brother spying on them all the time. And honestly, on top of the tensions, the couple are pretty young. They're 14 and they're 15 when they get married, so not consummating the marriage right away isn't totally crazy. And when the couple's royal family was told about the lack of consummation on the wedding night, they had two different reactions. Louis's grandfather, the King of France, didn't really care. He told everyone, just give them their space, they'll do it when they do it. But Marie's mother, the Empress, wrote some nasty letters to Marie telling her to be the perfect bride and just started reaming her out for being the subject of French gossip. She told her, you better consummate this marriage because the French tabloids are saying you can't seduce your husband. Some wild shit to be talking to your child about, in my opinion. But she was ultimately concerned that Marie was a fish out of water in the harshest judge society in the entire world, and she didn't think that her youngest daughter could hold her own against French scrutiny. And then in 1774, the King of France dies, after years of becoming less and less popular amongst the French people. And Marie Antoinette and her husband, Louis XVI, go on to inherit the French throne. And Louis XVI was a point of hope for the people. He was young, he was just 19, he was a bookworm, he was a smarty pants, so people were really feeling good with this new king. At the beginning, his beautiful, stylish, funny wife, Marie Antoinette, was pretty popular too. But as the years go on, without the royal consummation of the marriage and the production of an heir, the tides start to turn. Couple is drifting more and more apart. They are pretty much opposites in every measurable way. So, like siblings are dating, for real. But she's Queen of France, and that direct deposit is hitting, so she is balling the fuck out. She's walking around with the finest jewels, the finest gowns, wigs the size of a small toddler. Plus, she was known to be a bit of a gambler. And the king? Boring, lame, financially responsible. But the French people did prefer his cheap ass over the queen. Since the French economy is in hell, and they're like, why is this bitch-ass queen dressed like a clown on our dime? Not that the king didn't live lavish and spend big, he just didn't take the brunt of it. King Louis would go on to gift his wife a private estate that had belonged to his grandfather's mistress. It's almost like an olive branch because he knew his wife was really struggling with the lack of privacy. Her little getaway on palace grounds that she was known to sneak away to. And that brings us to the late 1770s, and this is when Austria decides they're actually going to get involved in this marriage and they're going to address this whole lack of consummation thing. 3 years into Marie Antoinette and her husband Louis XVI ruling as King and Queen of France, and 7 years since the date of their marriage, they still hadn't consummated that marriage. Which then became a family affair when Marie's Holy Roman Emperor brother decides to show up in France and is like, hey, what can I do to get you inside my sister? And they have a little bro out about performance anxiety, and that seems to work for the king because then Marie Antoinette is writing letters back to her mom saying, hell yeah, brother, I fucked the king. And shortly after that, the couple was able to conceive their first child. And in December 1778, Marie Antoinette would give birth to a baby girl. She named her Maria Theresa Charlotte, after her favorite sister and, of course, her bitch-ass empress mother. And Marie Antoinette's popularity in France was dropping, but the birth of the healthy little girl did increase her popularity a little bit, since a girl meant the promise of a boy. But it is an uphill battle trying to gain favor with the French people for Marie. Everyone is poor as shit, and revolutionary ideas of a new world that displaced authority or the need for royalty was sweeping through the kingdom. And like we said, the king and queen are complete nepo babies. They are completely out of touch with the reality of the working class in France. So they have no grasp on how the economic stress from French spending is crippling the working class. And most of the spending going on with France right now is military. France is honestly battling these hoes left and right, as well as heavily funding the American Revolution. The French armies, cavalry, and navy were what made the Hamilton musical possible. But at the same time, the French people are literally starving. They're surviving through some really bad harvests and extremely high taxes in order to pay for all this American and war bullshit. So shit starts to pop off. People start to push back. Enlightenment as a movement is spreading. The world is changing, and the French monarchy is arguably in one of its weakest points in history. Tensions are high, but the young king and queen push on, and they end up having 3 more children, 2 boys and a girl, and they name them variations of Louis and Marie. But the couple didn't exactly act as marriage goals or inspire family values within the French, since they were still kink-shaming Louis for not boning his wife for like 7 entire years, and they pretty much just were calling him all sorts of shit, thinking he was a simp for his wife, and they would compare him to a castrated hog. The French tabloids are tearing his ass up, but they're also smashing the queen, saying she's having all these affairs, she's into weird sex stuff, and she cucks her husband. Because God forbid a diva has hobbies. And Marie Antoinette's affairs are a hotly debated topic, but it is pretty likely that she did at least have one with one of her Swedish advisors at some point. Marie Antoinette spent a pretty considerable amount of time at the little hideaway she had been gifted early on in her marriage. The little escape provided herself and her family a space to relax in much less formal attire, and she did spend an insane amount of money renovating it into this French cottage feel so her and her rich friends could cosplay being poor. Which, of course, is batshit insane when we zoom out and look at the fact that you're cosplaying raising chickens or whatever, while your country is literally starving to death. But eventually, by the grace of God and 900 million trillion people telling them directly to their face, the royal couple finally gets it through their head that, maybe we need to reel in the spending a little bit. Maybe we don't need 3-foot-tall wigs and a golden throne to shit on. But as luck would have it, just as Marie Antoinette is getting a grip on her spending, she's pulling it back to reality, she gets caught up in quite a little scheme over a necklace. Basically, some thieves just lie on her name, they get someone to buy it for her, and then they just steal the necklace and they take off. And Marie Antoinette's like, I had nothing to do with that. And everyone's like, yeah, we're supposed to believe the jewel whore had nothing to do with that? Okay. So it's a really stressful time, and on top of that, one of her children dies, so it's just a terrible time for her. Her reputation and her life is just completely fucked, and to make matters worse, her husband is cracking under the pressure. The political landscape in France is extremely uncertain, and her husband is just drinking like a fish, so Marie is stepping up being like, I guess I'll take the king's meetings since I'm the only one doing anything around here. But the economy is sinking further and further into the hole, and none of these rich-ass business fucks are willing to give up their monopolies on industry or give up their cushy little tax breaks in order to try to save the economy and the country. And that's how we know some things never change. And eventually, the king calls a meeting. Everyone who's anyone shows up, and they all try to fix this shit. But it was honestly a bag of fucking cats, because the French busybody people that showed up, they wanted to change the government. They wanted a republic, a constitution, elected leaders, and the king and queen were kind of like, girl, what the hell? We're not giving you that. And the working class people were like, hey, we actually don't give a fuck about your little power struggle you have going on right now. We're having a bread crisis. We are starving to death. Our kids are dying. So it's cuckoo bananas. And on top of that, tuberculosis is flying around. And the French king and queen would take a huge blow when their son and heir dies of the disease. And normally, the loss of the Dauphin of France would stop the country in its tracks. But shit is so upside down in France that no one even takes notice that the royal family is in mourning, and in fact, they take their distance as an opportunity to push through some ideas while they're distracted. So now Marie Antoinette is crying in the club, and the Republic people are holding political rallies without the involvement of the monarchy. And this is where the wheels really come off the bus, and Marie Antoinette is in a lot of fucking danger. And though the French royal family is trying to keep this revolution pretty moderate and away from the radicals, it's not really working out that way. And when the Republic people start to hold rallies without the input of the monarchy gets scared. And so Marie Antoinette and the French royal family bring in military forces to protect them should shit start popping off in Paris. But the common people see this increase in military presence as a direct threat to them and their fight for change. Tensions are sky high, and all of this is leading to some wild-ass rebellions. They're even busting open the prisons. They are taking France's long-standing institutions down. Ready or not, royal family, here they come. The King of France, Louis XVI, gets awoken in the middle of the night, and they're like, hey man, the purge is going on outside. And he's like, girl, what do you mean? They're revolting? And they're like, no, babe, this is a revolution. And it's clear to anyone with eyes that shit is about to get crazy. So all the rich people in France are just getting the fuck out of Dodge. Which is what Marie Antoinette and her kids should have done, and just left her husband to go die on that hill alone. But despite her better judgment, when King Louis XVI said he was not leaving France, Marie stood by her man, trying to put their heads together to work out a system politically that would bring peace into the nation. But unfortunately, times are just too tough and they are out of chances. And the clear wealth disparity of children dying in the streets of Paris to wealthy businessmen, palace of Versailles, was just not gonna fly anymore. And Marie Antoinette's in her bedchambers, probably huffing paint or something, and all of a sudden the walls are shaking and an angry mob is coming towards her. So the queen hops, skips, and jumps her little ass through a secret door and gets away from the angry mob. And then all the French people come in and they're like, sacre bleu! And they start just like trashing the shit out of all Marie's stuff because they're mad she's not there and they can't just kill her. This little ambush would be the last straw for the king and queen, however, and they decide to pack up their shit and go into Paris to a much safer home. And like a typical man, King Louis just shits the bed at this point. He just checks out of his job completely and does not give a fuck about fixing this situation. And Marie is doing absolutely everything she can to try to retain any political power while reaching a middle ground with people that want their heads. And she does seem to be genuinely trying to fix it, but she is a bit of a double agent, secret agent Cody Banks. Because Marie's kissing ass, she's being buddy-buddy with all these French Republican government guys, while she's also writing back to the Austrian royal family, giving them all the tea on what's happening in France. She is not succeeding though, and the revolution would go on to become more radical and separate itself farther and farther from the monarchy. And after a powerful ally she had in the revolutionary movement dies, Marie realizes that this is going in a very dangerous direction. And so in 1791, a late night in the middle of June, they took off to the Austrian border with Marie Antoinette's longtime Swedish advisor slash possible secret boyfriend. And they're on their merry way, trotting through the French countryside. On the journey, they do part ways with the Swedish advisor on their way to the Austrian border. But this is where they fuck up, because they have no idea how to blend in with common folks. They've never lived a common day in their fucking lives, so they're going through the French countryside with shit that's way too nice to be out there. They look suspicious as hell, and when King Louis steps out of the carriage for a minute, it just takes one guy delivering letters to be like, hey, isn't that the guy from the coins? And then the king and queen are surrounded. All of their things are stripped and searched, and they are marched off back to Paris and officially prisoners. With most people in France subscribing to the idea that they were headed to Austria in order to get military aid to help overthrow the French Revolution. So it did not take long for France to declare war on Austria, and the revolution hits its all-time high with the abolishment of the monarchy and a Paris-wide sweep taking out all of the royalists and people who were against the revolution. And the royal family, now being stripped of their titles, is moved to a high-security prison. And they're all together having one of the most fucked up family vacations in in history until King Louis is put on trial for treason and they chop his head off. And the children were then removed from Marie Antoinette's care. And these little jail kids are actually kind of treated like shit because they're seen as political threats to the revolution, even though they're like 7 years old, so. And at this point, it's just the son and the daughter left. The son would actually die in confinement, and the daughter would make it to adulthood, and she eventually makes it to Austria and marries her cousin. But back to Marie, who was moved into some shitty little cell and then put on trial herself. And this trial is a complete setup. They said that she was conspiring with Austria against France, and that she was a morally corrupt woman who was not above doing weird stuff with her children, and some other boring legal stuff. All of which they had zero proof of her doing. I mean, did she spy on them and tell Austria what they were doing? Yes. Did they know that? No. But since Marie was 14 years old and stepped on French soil for the first time, her little ass has been the subject of every salacious French headline. So people are really quick to believe whatever about her. So this dumbass trial goes on, and the judge finds her guilty, and Marie's like, alright, tight. I actually would rather fucking die than hang out with you lames anyway. And in October 1793, Marie is set to be executed, with her pretty little head getting chopped right off. So she's in her all-white fit, and she's sitting in her carriage. They're driving her through the city. Everyone's kind of gawking at her while she's just sitting there, stoic and calm. And then, as the story goes, she climbs to the execution block. She accidentally steps on the executioner's toes. She says, "My bad, B." She kneels down, and they drop the blade. The queen's head is promptly removed from her body, and the crowd cheers as they hold it up in victory. And that's the story of Marie Antoinette. What do you think? Do you think she deserved all that? I think it makes a hell of a cautionary tale, and if any of you are starting a revolution, call me.
The revolution about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy.